The Shepnaz podcast begins now.
You're listening to the Shepnaz podcast, a podcast by Shepherd Church. Everything we do at Shepherd is to connect our community in a meaningful relationship with Christ, and we're expecting great things. My name's Joey. I'll be your host, and I'm joined today by Tim Swanson, Executive Pastor of Operations here at Shepherd Church. Today is day 3 of the 21 Days of Prayer and Fasting, and we're going to look at chapter 3 in Rob McCorkle's book, Life and Death. And we'll get to know Pastor Tim a little better, and it's all coming up on this episode of the Shepnaz podcast. Pastor Tim, welcome in. Thanks for being here today, man. How are you doing?
Doing well. Thanks
Good.
for having me.
Yeah, of course, man. Hey, let's just dive right into today's reading from the book Life and Death by Rob McCorkle. Today's chapter was called Unwholesome Words, and we thought you were perfect for this chapter. No, we really just kind of threw a dart at the dartboard for everybody's chapters. People started reading into them a little bit too much. But yeah, would you help summarize what Rob's trying to get at this episode in this chapter?
Yeah, it was a good chapter. Lesson 3 is, as you said, titled Unwholesome Words, and the unwholesome reference comes from Ephesians 4:29. And that verse says, "Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen." And of course, the primary word McCorkle highlights is that word unwholesome. And it's, I think the English language, we miss it sometimes because it doesn't have the depth that the Greek word for that is sapros, which means rotten or putrid. And stems from a root word that means septic. And so that really kind of brings this out in a way that you wouldn't have thought just to read the word unwholesome. The Apostle Paul was very intentional, I think, in using that word, and especially given the fact that in the city of Ephesus, which was a really wealthy city, had a lot of bad influences, the people involved in witchcraft and divination, fortune tellers. There was a lot of prostitution, just a lot of promiscuous activity, just day and night, as McCorkle talks about in that chapter. But also in chapter 4, Paul reflects on other characteristics of some people in Ephesus who were struggling with everything from bitterness to rage and anger. Brawling and slander is mentioned in these verses, along with, as Paul says in verse 31, every other form of malice. So it includes just a ton of things. And so it's because of things like this that the words Paul was hearing in Ephesus, as he described them, that they were septic or unwholesome. Yeah. And so he was warning the believers in Ephesus to be careful about the language they used, and especially, and this is really important, especially in response to unbelievers. And those that they were speaking to who were unbelievers, and to not let any unwholesome words be heard from those who follow Christ. And so I think Paul recognized that as believers, and this was something that really kind of stood out to me, that our words carry weight. Yeah. And what we say to others must represent Jesus Christ in a way that really honors him. McCorkle draws this kind of unfortunate but true parallel to our culture today, and that is that today we're also surrounded by just immorality everywhere. And McCorkle makes what I would call an indictment about our words as believers. And he says, and this is a quote, "All too often the language and words we use when speaking to people and about people are unwholesome." To me, that's just really convicting. And as believers, there's a significant danger in using unwholesome words like this, especially when we're talking, as we said before, with new believers. McCorkle says, and this was a quote too that I think is really important, "Very few things are more detrimental to young Christians than exposure to an unwholesome conversation spoken by other Christ followers."
Oh, for sure.
And then McCorkle asks a very tough question every believer, I think, should ask themselves, and that's this: have you become an echo of the culture or a voice that reflects your citizenship in heaven? Wow. And obviously, our answer has to be the latter.
Yeah. I remember a time I was in, I'm not going to name the church or the location because I don't want it to be, but I remember being a young pastor and walking into the church lobby and walking into a conversation with two board members was not a wholesome conversation. And it really hurt my heart as a pastor, because I thought it's not what I expected the conversation to be. And I was pretty young. I was 22, thinking, how do I correct this as a pastor? How do I speak into this and say these are guys who've been on the board for decades? But it really is to walk into a conversation like that. And I can't imagine if it was a new believer or someone who's like asking questions about faith and like, is this thing for me, to walk into a conversation like that and think, I don't need this, if that's what it's like.
And the thing is, I think it's expected of us as pastors, but regardless of the fact that we carry that title, as believers, we have to be watchful and mindful of the things we say. I think about, there was a reference that McCorkle made in there about being careful of the water cooler conversations. In other words, that the people that you see at work, and if your words and actions don't follow on Monday and Tuesday throughout the work week, the same words that you would have on Sunday, then there's something unwholesome and wrong about that.
Well, did you have anything that maybe stuck out to you or challenged you personally as you read through this and kind of meditated on it?
Yeah, there was. Toward the end of the chapter, there's a reference that is made to David's words in Psalm 141, verse 3, and David says, "Set a guard, O Lord, over my mouth. Keep watch over the door to my lips." The New Living Translation says it this way: "Take control of what I say, O Lord, and guard my lips." And I think what really challenges me is knowing that I need to guard what I say, and that what comes out of my mouth must be wholesome, helpful, and truly edify others. And there's something that's very intentional that has to happen to put that guard in place. It's not something that you can just assume will always be there. You've got to be mindful of it all the time.
Yeah, that's good. And then as for everyone listening, and maybe for yourself, what's something practical, kind of a next step for people to take as they want to implement what Rob's talking about in this chapter? What's a next step they could take, or something practical they could do today?
Well, McCorkle suggests taking an inventory of the words you use, and by being intentional and recognizing the words I use, what I say to others will not be unwholesome. And so instead my words would hopefully build others up, that they would strengthen them, and that they would honor Jesus Christ. But I think when you talk about taking the inventory, kind of step back from conversations you've had, maybe the conversation we have today, or another one, and say, is there something I said? Is there something that could be said differently? Is there something that could have been inferred as off color or inappropriate, or not in this conversation? But that can happen, and when we're talking to people. So just really being mindful of taking that inventory.
Good. Thanks, Pastor Tim, for your insights today. And stick around. We're going to talk a little bit with Pastor Tim about some of his life journey right after this quick break. This January, we want to invite you to participate in a 21 days of prayer and fasting at Shepherd Church. Each day we'll have prayer prompts, scriptures to read, and even times at the sanctuary will be open for prayer. Plus, on the Shepnaz podcast, we'll be walking through Rob McCorkle's book, Life and Death, The Power of Words, with a guest each weekday. You can get a copy of that book through our website at shepnaz.org/21days, in the lobby on Sundays, or you can find it for yourself on Amazon. All the resources that you'll need for daily prayer and scripture prompts can also be found at shepnaz.org/21days. And mark your calendars for January 29th as we close out the 21 days with an evening of worship together at Shepherd. Again, don't miss the opportunity to press into what God is doing as we kick off the new year here at Shepherd. All right, Pastor Tim. Well, Shepherd's been around a long time, and there's plenty of folks who've been a part of Shepherd for a long time, and I've been a part of our faith family, and a lot probably know you and your story because you've been in ministering here for quite some time. But I'm probably willing to bet that there are some people who are newer who might not know kind of how you came here, or maybe even what you do, because I see what you do, and I'm like, it's quite the wide array. So would you mind telling us maybe a little bit about your story, or how you came to faith or your call in ministry and when that came, and then how you ended up at Shepherd.
Yeah, I'd love to. I've been on staff at Shepherd since 2003 in my role as executive pastor. And I'm not the typical executive pastor in terms of role. When I came here, my primary role was more pastoral care. And so I do and still do a lot of the hospital calling. I spend time with our folks that are shut-ins in the nursing home, serving them communion, that kind of thing. But doing the pastoral care role has also given me the bittersweet privilege of also serving families when they have someone that passes away. So I'm involved in most of the funerals here as well. But in addition to that, I came out of a business background, and so some of my experience from that has allowed me to also be, and that's where the operations side of in the title now comes into play, is having responsibility for the campus and the buildings, and as well as some coordination, quite a bit of coordination with the daycare and the preschool. But I came out of that business background. I first had a call to ministry back in around 1991, 92, and my wife and I had gone to a missions conference. We, at that time, thought we were being called to the mission field. I had a plan, which God kind of laughed at.
Sure.
We thought was to go to Austria to serve as a business administrator for a school for MKs or missionary kids.
Okay.
We started to raise support to go. That door wound up closing. A longer story perhaps for another time. But when that door closed, we still had a sense that God was truly calling us. We just didn't know where.
Sure.
And so from about 1992 to 2002, going into 2003, was a period of waiting. So 10 plus years. But every so often God would remind us that there was still clearly a call in our life. We just didn't know where. And then in January of 2003, Eddie Estep, who was our senior pastor here at the time, and had been my pastor as a layperson back in Maysville, Kentucky, when we had lived there, and I was with a company there. He called up and asked if I would pray about the possibility of coming to Shepherd in the role of what was called then Director of Congregational Care. And we prayed, the board prayed, and in June of 2003, I started in that role.
Okay.
And then at that same time began to go through classes and seek the ordination and all that would be necessary in order to become an ordained elder in the Church of the Nazarene.
Awesome. So what's one of the things that you, this is really just putting you on the spot, so sorry about that. What's something that you do here that you say, like, that's like, I live for that. Like, this is my favorite thing that we do, that I get to do at Shepherd. It might not even be related to your job.
Well, I can tell you one thing it would not be, and that would be roof repairs. And to a select number of people, they will understand the humor in that. But spent way too much time on that in this past year for a need that we had. Kind of got myself off track here. Something that I do that people wouldn't realize that I do.
No, that you just love to do. Like,
I love to do.
And it doesn't have to be related to your job. Like, so like people don't know this, and it has nothing to do with your job. But like, I see you in the drop off and pickup line, connecting with families at the school a lot. Yeah. I don't know if it's every day, but you're out there a lot, and it's not necessarily a part of your job, but it's something that you've done for a long time, and it makes a difference. And I remember I've seen people like that would come to maybe our trunk or treat event that haven't gone to school here in a decade, but they remember you because that, like, you made that a point. But that's not in your job description. Like what's something that you say, like, this is what I love to do at Shepherd. I love to be a part of.
Well, I think what you just suggested or said is something that would be in that category, because I do love spending time there in the morning. I'm a quasi crossing guard, I guess. But I think more importantly, it gives me an opportunity, and I've had several opportunities to pray with families.
Yeah.
Where they share things with me that they wouldn't otherwise share with someone, I think. And just give them a sense that there is someone here who cares, not because they're a teacher or an administrator or something like that, but just because there's somebody here who cares about them and their family. And it's led to opportunities for pastoral care. And we've had some families come to Shepherd, I don't know necessarily through that experience or through that interaction, but God uses all of that together to help us live out that mission that we talk about, connecting our community, because that is part of our community.
Yeah, that's good, man. Well, Tim, I like when God brought my family here, having somebody who's served on the staff for that long is a plus for me. Like I like to come somewhere. The last church I was at, when I showed up, there had been somebody on staff that he was getting ready to go into his 35th year on that staff, and I thought, man, if somebody can be here that long, then it's got to be a place that I could make it and that I could stick around. So I'm thankful for your testimony for what you've been through. 3 pastors, right? You're just outliving them all.
Yeah, and Pastor Rob is not allowed to leave, so we'll get that on the record.
Yeah, sounds good. Well, hey, that's going to do it for our episode today on the Shepnaz podcast. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your audio so you don't miss an episode. We hope that you continue to connect with us. As always, you can learn more about what's happening through our app, our social media pages, and at shepnaz.org. For Pastor Tim, I'm Joey. Thanks for listening. Have a great day.
This podcast is a production of the Shepherd Church of the Nazarene, Gahanna, Ohio. Email to podcast@shepnaz.org and let us know what you think.